Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to MPA 623, a seminar in effective public management. My name is Dr. Powell, so it's nice to see everyone tonight. Looks like we have 22 folks in the session right now, so probably have a couple of your colleagues joining us in a few minutes. I know a couple of colleagues have emailed me and told me they're not going to be here tonight, but still looks like we have a good majority of the cohort here. So welcome again. This is our first night together. So I thought what I would do is I'll start off telling you a little bit about me and who I am and why I'm here. And then we'll talk about the course. I have made some last minute changes to the syllabus again. So I think we're on the fourth iteration of the syllabus in order to try and reduce some of the assignments for you and kind of make this course a little bit more manageable from a workload perspective, since you are taking this course at the same time that you are doing 698. So as we go through the syllabus, I'll explain to you some of the changes I made recently to try and make your workload a little bit lighter in recognition of you doing this class in tandem with 698. But again, my name is Dave Powell. I'm the instructor. I've been teaching here in this program at Northridge for about 10 years now on an adjunct basis. My full-time position is at California State University, Long Beach. And at Long Beach, I am a professor as well as I'm also a program director there. I was department chair there for about 10 years and just a couple of years ago decided to take a step away and allow the younger generation to step up and take some leadership roles. So those 10 years of department chair are behind me now. I'm still program director for the distance learning MPA program, as Richard says, Go Beach. I've been at Long Beach now I'm going to be entering my 23rd year in the fall at Long Beach. And before I came to Long Beach, I taught in Florida at a place called Florida Gulf Coast University. I don't know if everyone's heard of Florida Gulf Coast University before, but I taught there. Was there for about a year. When I got there, the university was only 3 years old. It had an enrollment of about 500 students, and now I think they're up to almost 18 or 19,000. So it's a state university that's going strong. When I was there, it was referred to as Florida Golf Course University, primarily because it was completely surrounded by golf courses. The entire university was built in a swamp because it was free land that was given to the state of Florida. And the state of Florida then decided to sell off all the land around the university to developers for golf courses. So it was known as Florida Golf Course University. But spent a year there starting up their MPA program. And before that, my first position was at Eastern Illinois University in Charleston, Illinois. And I taught there for 4 years, teaching both undergraduate as well as graduate level political science and public administration. But as I said, I'm going in my 23rd year at Long Beach, and this is about 10 years for me teaching here in the Northridge program. I typically teach this course. I have in the past taught budgeting. I've taught the 610 course, organization theory, so a variety of courses. But this is the course that I typically teach at least once, maybe twice a year, depending on how my schedule permits with Cal State Long Beach. So that's what I do in terms of teaching and research. I also, in terms of service, I served as a local elected official for about 6 years on the local school board in Santa Clarita. I did that from 2014 to 2020, which is a really nice experience because I was able to take a lot of what I do in the classroom and apply it in practical sense in terms of running a not a large, but a medium-sized school district. We had about $150 million general fund budget. We had, I think, 15 schools, about 11,000 students. And so it kept me busy doing that in addition to teaching at Long Beach. So that's basically me. I will learn more about each of you as we go through the course. I know you're all part of a cohort, so you all probably know each other really well by now. But I'll start learning more about you over the next few weeks. Let me share with you now, and I'm sure you've probably seen the syllabus up on our Canvas site, but it does look a little bit different because I have made some changes. So let me share the syllabus out to you. Give it a second to load. All right, you should be able to see the syllabus on your screen. Let me just walk you through the syllabus, and I'm going to highlight some of the changes that I made recently in order to, again, reduce some of your workload in recognition of the work that you're doing in 698. I've spoken with a few of you about concerns about the workload of juggling these two courses. And I've also taught with you, spoke with your 698 instructor as well. She may have already told you that, but we have exchanged some emails trying to work out arrangements to try and make this a little bit easier on you this summer. She shared with me some of the due dates that you have coming up in 698. So I am aware that you have a due date. I believe it's July 7th. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Feel free to correct me in text chat or speak up if I'm wrong about any of these dates. But I believe she said it was July 7th for your draft in 698 that is due. And when I went back and looked at the syllabus, I realized that that was at the same time that you had some other assignments due in this class. And so I've changed some of the due dates and I've reduced the number of assignments in order to allow you a little bit more time in order to work on your 698 projects. But again, in terms of the syllabus, it's all the beginning of the syllabus that you've already seen on our Canvas site remains the same. You know who I am. The best way to contact me is via email. And so you can send an email to that email address on our syllabus. I'm really good at returning emails, but I'm not so good at returning voicemails. I'm much more of a electronic kind of person than a telephone person. So best way to contact me is via email. You can contact me through our site as well, and you know how to do that. Several people have already emailed me through that, so you can contact me through our course site. Either way is fine. Let me go on down here. And in terms of office hours, we're going to do office hours essentially as arranged. And so if you need to talk to me about any issues, send me an email. We can talk via email, or if you need to talk via a Zoom session, we can always set up a Zoom session as well. But contact me via email to set up any times in case you need to talk about any of the aspects of the course. I really like this course a lot because I realize it's an elective course, but it is also, the way I view it, a capstone course. And that really affords us the opportunity, now that you are working on your 698 project and now you're at that point in your program, to bring in a lot of the things that you have learned throughout your time in the program and apply them on a practical level to address and solve a practical problem in your organizations. So the primary purpose of this course is to give you the opportunity to identify some problem or some issue in your organization that is inhibiting excellence, that's inhibiting the effectiveness of your organization. You know, in the past, people have talked about things such as a lack of succession planning. Some people have talked about high rates of employee turnover, low rates of employee morale. Some people have talked about a lack of professional development opportunities. Some people have talked about the very lengthy and protracted recruitment process and how that's made it difficult to get people into the organization in a timely manner. Some people talk about the lack of an onboarding system. So when people come into the organization, there's not adequate onboarding to get them acclimated to the organization's functions, and its culture. So again, those are just some of the issues or problems people have focused on in the past. But in this course, you'll select an issue or problem that you think is inhibiting the effectiveness of your organization. And then you'll be able to bring in information that we'll cover in class that you've probably covered in some previous courses and apply that information in order to address that problem. I always tell my students at Long Beach, and every single one of my classes, I tell them that we are an MPA program. And as a graduate public affairs program, it means that we are both a scholarly as well as a professional program. We're a scholarly program in that we're master's level. And so there are some academic writing types of expectations and critical thinking expectations that are required of you as a graduate student. But we're also very much of a professional program in that we are applying information to the public sector. And we're always trying to find that nexus between theory and practice. And I think this course is a really nice one near the end of your program to give you that platform that you can really apply theory to practice for your given organization, or an organization that you are familiar with. I'm assuming most people are currently working in organizations If you're not currently working in an organization, and it can be public, nonprofit, or private, doesn't matter the sector, but if you're not currently working in an organization, then you'll be focusing on an organization that you have worked in the past or an organization that you are familiar with. But it's a really nice way to find that nexus between theory and practice. And that's our primary purpose in this program. I've listed for you 3 primary course learning objectives that are then crosswalked back to the objectives of the MPA program itself. So you can read through that. The textbook we're going to be using, I've limited to only 1 textbook because we don't have a whole lot of time together this term. And also, I know you're going to be doing a whole lot of reading for the work you're doing in 698. So we only have 1 textbook, and that's the Hal Rainey textbook, Understanding and Managing Public Organizations. I have the 6th edition listed on the syllabus. You can use an older edition if you would like. I actually, on my shelf right now, the one I have handy is actually the 5th edition. And so it's the blue one. You can see that, that's the blue one, the 5th edition. I think the 6th edition, 2021, is actually red. It looks the same except it's red. The content is very similar. The only real difference between the newest edition and the 5th edition, or the 6th edition, I'm sorry, the 5th edition, is that in the 6th edition, there's an additional chapter that kind of takes us a little bit post-COVID and talks about some of the implications of COVID on managing organizations. We're not really going to spend a whole lot of time on that chapter, but all the other chapters are all essentially the same between the 5th and the 6th edition. So I will leave it completely up to you which edition you would like to use, but it is the Hal Rainey book, Understanding and Managing Public Organizations. I think it's a really nice book to use in a class such as this because it does cover a lot of the factors that contribute to or detract from effectiveness of organizations. It covers things such as motivation, covers things such as leadership theories, covers, basic organization structure and what that means for effectiveness. It covers mission statements and goals and values and strategic planning. And it really covers a lot of the factors that contribute to the idea of effectiveness in an organization. And by necessity, our focus is primarily going to be on effective organizations, because as we know, most of the work in public administration is done within public organizations. So it just makes sense that when we're talking about effectiveness, we're oftentimes looking at what's going on within the walls of a public organization. So that's the Hal Rainey textbook and the only one that we're going to be using as our primary text. I have added some additional reserve readings, and those reserve readings can be accessed through links on our Canvas site. Those are readings that are helpful, but the only one that I think is really, really necessary is the Graham Allison article looking at public versus private organizations. And you may have covered that article in previous courses. That reserve reading, I think, is important. So if you can find the time to do that one, I think that would be very helpful. The other ones are kind of there for your personal edification. And so depending upon the amount of time you have juggling these 2 courses, that's kind of optional reading for you. I've got those included in the syllabus, but again, I think really the Graham Allison article is the one that is most important in terms of our e-reserve articles. Our sessions obviously are scheduled for Monday evenings beginning at 6 o'clock. And I know that we had to juggle some things around with your 698 course. And so I believe that you're meeting on a different night for 698. And then whenever we are done here on July 10th, I think then after that, then your 698 instructor may move you to Mondays. I don't know. I think she has some plan for after this course ends, but we will be meeting on Monday nights. I have another class that I teach for Long Beach on Tuesday nights and another class I teach for Long Beach on Wednesday nights. And so when I signed on for this class about 7 months ago, this Monday night was the only night that's available. I do have a question for you. So I do want to know, so far in your cohort, your Zoom sessions, how long do you usually spend in your Zoom sessions? Are you usually 3 hours, 2 hours, 3.5 hours?
2 hours. 2 hours.
2.
2 hours. We're usually done by 8.
Perfect. Okay. That's what I thought. When I've taught online cohorts before, it's always 6 to 8. I do know that there's been a push in the program to make those sessions a little bit longer, but since you're comfortable with 6 to 8, you're used to 6 to 8, we're going to do our session 6 to 8 as well. And that will also then afford you some extra time then to also focus on your 698 projects. So thank you. That's very helpful. So we'll be 6 to 8 o'clock on Mondays. Typically, I usually like to break the class up into first and second half. And so we'll take a break somewhere around the hour mark, about 10-minute break, and then come back and finish up the second half of class. So you can read through all the rest of this on your own. Again, it's just kind of boilerplate information you tend to have on most of your syllabi. So let's talk a bit about the course requirements. What are you going to be doing in the course, and when are you going to be doing it? Now, this is some information that I have changed a little bit along the way to, again, accommodate your 698 course. So in terms of the paper assignments, we have officially 3 paper assignments in this class. However, they're not your normal paper assignments in that they do not require outside research necessarily. There may be some outside research that you want to do to augment the papers, but for the most part, they focus on a problem or an issue in your organization and then developing solutions to that problem. And so most of the work is going to come from your knowledge of your organization, your knowledge of the problem that you are focusing on in your organization. So the first paper assignment that you'll have is what we call the background paper. Background paper is a very brief 3 to 5 page paper where you introduce the problem or the issue that you'll be focusing on for this course. And again, like I said before, the problem or the issue is completely up to you. You know your organization much better than I do. And so you're the expert on your organization. You know what the primary problems are in your organization. Again, in the past, people have done employee turnover, succession planning. Those are just some of the ones I've seen in the past, but it's really wide open to you. And you can pick any problem, any issue that you think is inhibiting the effectiveness of your organization. For this paper, for that problem, you will then give me a short 3 to 5 page paper wherein you will describe the issue. What is the issue or the problem, and why is the issue or problem important? Who is involved in the issue? And then you'll give me a little background on the issue. Where did the issue or problem come from? Is it a new issue, or is it an issue that has been around for a long time in the organization? Has the organization tried to resolve the issue before? Have there been efforts to address the issue in the past? And if so, how successful have those efforts been? Now, obviously, if there have been efforts to solve this problem in the past, they probably have not been 100% successful because you still see it as being a problem today in your organization. But what's the organization done about it in the past? You know, some of these problems that people point out, no one's really addressed in the organization before. So it's a relatively new, novel type of problem. Some of the problems the organization has been dealing with for many years and just hasn't really been able to get its arms around the problem and really been able to resolve the problem. So you're just in 3 to 5 pages educating me on the problem, what it is, where it came from, who's involved in the problem, and what the organization's tried to do in the past to resolve the problem. Yeah, it's a short 3 to 5 page paper, title page, reference sheet if you need it. You may not need a reference sheet for this paper, depending upon the problem that you are talking about. Reference sheet is not necessary if you don't have any outside sources that you're using. Lord knows you're going to be doing enough outside research in your 698 class that we don't really want these papers in this class to be research papers. They're more applied papers. And using APA 7th edition, which I believe you've been using throughout the program, so you're probably very familiar with it. I am not a huge stickler on APA format. If you do use some citations that they do not adhere completely with APA format, I will note that, but I'm not really going to do many point deductions for it. I will just note it for you, but I'm not a huge stickler when it comes to all the details for APA. Because personally myself, in 7th edition APA, I think there are some things that are really pretty counterintuitive, especially in terms of citations that me a while to get comfortable with, and I'm not even 100% sure I'm completely comfortable with APA 7th, even after using it for several years. So that's your background paper. I've got a basic grading rubric there for you. So your description of the issue portion of the paper will be worth 40% of the grade. The background of the issue will be worth 40% of the grade. And then I also have a 20% component for quality of writing. So do make sure that the paper is well written. Make sure that you have proofread the paper, because I try not to be an editor anymore. As I've gotten older, I have found that the more I edit papers, the less sanity I have left. And so I try not to line edit all papers, but I will go through and edit the paper. And so do make sure that it is well written and that it is proofread and loosely abides by APA formatting. Now, the due date on that paper is June 18th. We're going to keep that due date because, again, I think this is a very short paper. It's something that probably will not take you a whole lot of time to do, doesn't require outside research. And so it's something I think you probably can get done by June 18th, even while you are doing the work for your 698 class. So we're going to keep that due date on June the 18th. Then your second paper assignment is your alternative solutions paper. So for that problem or that issue you identified in your background paper, you will then develop 3 alternative solutions, 3 possible solutions that could solve or mitigate that issue or that problem you talked about in your background paper. So in this alternative solutions paper, you will present to me 3 different alternative solutions. And for each of those solutions, identify the solution, what is it, and how will it potentially solve the issue? What specific steps would you take to implement this solution? Actor involvement, who would be involved in developing and implementing the solution? What roles would they play? And how would you get their agreement? How would you get their buy-in in order to implement these solutions? And then finally, how easy or difficult would it be to actually implement each one of these solutions? So a really straightforward thing you can do in writing this paper is you can literally just remind me of the problem that you are focusing on. So have a paragraph where you say, here is the problem again. And then alternative number 1, tell me about alternative number 1. Alternative number 2, what it is and tell me about it. And then alternative number 3, what it is and tell me about it. You can really be that organized and that straightforward with the way in which you're writing the paper. So you're just presenting to me your 3 different alternative solutions. This also should be a relatively short paper. You don't necessarily have to do any outside research. If you do feel that outside research would help support one of your alternatives, then you can always include that and include a reference page, but it's not necessarily required. I'm really looking at your originality, your creativity in coming up with alternative solutions to the problem that you identified in your background paper. I am hoping that the alternative solutions are realistic. So keep in mind budgetary limitations in your organization. Is this realistic from a budgetary perspective? Keep in mind, is it realistic from a political perspective? Is this something that has to be approved by the county board of supervisors, and that would be very difficult to get that type of an approval? Or is it something that can be approved by a unit or division manager? That would be much easier and much more feasible to be approved. So think about the feasibility of each one of these 3 alternatives. So you're presenting 3 alternatives. For each alternative, you will then describe the alternative. You'll then analyze and describe the actors involved in that alternative and the implementation of the alternative, and then again, a 20% quality of writing component. Now, the due date I have changed, and I changed the due date after speaking with your 698 instructor and hearing that you have your draft due, I believe, on July 7th. So what I'm going to allow you to do is I'm going to allow you to have until the end of our class to submit this alternative solutions paper, which is our last session's on July 10th, and so on July 11th, by midnight on July 11th. So I've pushed the due date back for this alternative solutions paper. And hopefully that will be helpful in your planning of your workload. So then your third paper is what I refer to as your chosen solution paper. And it's exactly what it sounds like. You will look at those three alternatives that you presented in your alternative solutions paper, and then you will choose one of those three, maybe two of those three, maybe a hybrid combination of all three of them. But you will tell me what solution you have chosen, which solution is most appropriate to address the problem that you presented in your background paper. And when you tell me about that solution or a combination of solutions, you will develop a discussion of the solution you've chosen, develop a justification for why this solution is superior to other alternatives, utilize concepts and theories we've covered in the course to justify why this is the most effective solution to the issue or the problem. We're not looking for the best solution, we're looking for the most appropriate solution. And as I tell all of my classes, I have one favorite answer and I have one favorite question. My favorite answer is it depends. Because public administration, as you probably know by now, it really does depend upon the context of the situation. There is no panacea. There's no one cure-all that can be applied in every organization and in every situation. We really have to tailor our responses and our approaches to the context of the situation in which we are dealing. So it's going to depend. And here it's going to depend. So you're going to tell me the solution or combination of solutions that are most effective and most appropriate for this problem in this organization at this given point in time. My favorite question is, so what? I love the so what question. And that really gets to the whole purpose of this class is, well, so what? So why are we talking about motivational theories? Why are we talking about leadership theories? Why are we talking about how to develop mission statements and goals and value statements? Well, it matters because it applies then to making us more effective in the public sector. And so the so what is, well, what does this mean for effectiveness? And you're probably going to get sick of us talking about that because that's what this whole course is about. So when we cover information, we're then going to say, well, what does that mean for effectiveness? How does that contribute to or detract from effectiveness in public and nonprofit organizations? So for this one, we're looking at applicability, and hopefully the solution that you are generating will help make your organization more effective. And tonight, in the second half of class, we will talk about effectiveness, different ways of measuring effectiveness, and kind of get us going with some of that background information on what we mean by effectiveness in public and nonprofit organizations. Now, here is another change that I made from the original syllabus. Originally, what I usually would have students do is, in addition to talking about their chosen solution, I would then also have you submit your modified, revised background paper and your modified, revised alternative solutions paper. Again, to recognize the amount of workload you have balancing these two classes, I've taken those requirements away. So you no longer have to resubmit your alternative solutions and your background paper. In the chosen solution paper, you are only submitting, here's the chosen solution and the justification for why that solution is most appropriate in this situation. Now, I know that sometimes it can be a little tricky and could be a little uncomfortable whenever you are identifying a problem in your organization. And if you don't want to share with me the name of your organization, that's fine with me. You can talk about the organization in more general terms. You want to say a large county organization or a large city organization that does A, B, and C. You can make it more generic if that makes you more comfortable. So you're not required to actually identify the organization in your papers if you're uncomfortable doing so. I leave that completely up to you. So in that chosen solution paper, then you can forget about the revised background and the revised alternative solutions paper. The entire paper, all 80% will be on how well you have justified the solutions that you have chosen. And then, as always, a 20% quality of writing attachment to that component, if you will. So don't worry about resubmitting anything. It'll just be that chosen solution paper, your solution, what you chose, and why you chose it. And then that due date will again be at the end of our class, so July 11th. So your alternative solutions paper and your chosen solution paper, The last day to turn those in will be July 11th. So that gets you through your submission of your draft in your 698 class on July 7th, and buys you a few extra days after that then to turn these papers in. Now, obviously, you can turn them in early if you would like. You can turn the papers in at any time you would like to throughout our course together. It's completely up to you, but I thought moving those due dates to July 11th probably would be beneficial for you and your workload. So let me break there and ask, are there any questions at all on any of these three paper assignments?
So far, so good, Professor.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said so far, so good.
Okay, perfect.
Professor, I have a quick question.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I work for a very large organization called the State of California.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, should I be looking at, I work for the State Water Resources Control Board, which is also a large organization. Should I look at a problem within the whole organization itself, or just like within my office?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And you should probably focus within your office. I mean, we were dealing with a very large organization. It's going to make the papers more difficult to do. So, yeah, if you can drill down to an office, a unit, or a division within the organization and focus on that.
Okay, thanks. That's all I had.
Yep. Well, thank you. I mean, that's a great question. I forgot to point that out, but yes, feel free to drill down to a part within your organization.
Professor, I had a quick question.
Sure.
So, like in my situation, I'm newer to the department and like to the entity at all. So I work for the county of LA in DPSS, and I've never worked for the county prior to it. So I don't have any other experience. So, but my problem is something that I've just realized within the time that I've worked there. I just want to make sure that I would have enough background information when it comes down to like the second and third paper with trying to understand what types of solutions, because all of my, it would just be based on whatever we've learned so far, maybe in the program, and then whatever my idea of what my belief would be better practices.
Yeah, and
So,
I think that's fine. Yeah, I understand what you're saying exactly. But go ahead.
No, that was it. That was good. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying. It's a very good point. If you're new to the organization, what information do you then have in order to build out these three alternative solutions? I think that if you are new to the organization, you can look at what you've experienced so far in the organization. So maybe if I don't know what the recruitment process was like, but maybe are there any problems in the recruitment process or maybe in the onboarding process that you thought could have been done better by the organization? Are there any things that you would have liked to have seen done differently in recruiting or onboarding? And maybe that could be a way to approach it, since you are new to the organization.
Right. Okay.
So
thanks.
Does that help?
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Let's see. We have a question in text chat. So, would the page counts for paper 2 and 3 be different due to the change of resubmitting edited papers? Yeah, your final paper is going to be a lot shorter than it normally would be. I think normally they're about 20 pages or so, because it includes your background paper as well as your alternative solutions paper, the revisions of those. And so, since you're only doing your chosen solution and the justification, we're looking at maybe 3 pages, 3 to 5 pages, I think is certainly something you can do it within. So yeah, all the papers are pretty tight in terms of their length. I'm sorry, Armin, go ahead.
Professor Powell, just so are the last paper, is that going to include all the first 2 papers, all of the papers together, or can we just submit them separately?
Yeah, you can submit your final paper will only be the chosen solution. So it'll just be, here's the solution I've chosen and here's the justification for it. Now, since we have made the due date for both the alternative solutions paper and the chosen paper July 11th, if you're going to submit them both on July 11th, I would ask that they're separate papers and submit it to the separate drop boxes. It'll just be easier for me to grade them as opposed to combining them together. So, do submit them separately to the separate drop boxes, the assignment boxes in our Canvas site. But that third paper, that chosen solution paper, will only be the solution that you chose and the justification for choosing that solution. You don't have
Because
to resubmit anything.
the reason I was asking is if I don't know, we get to finish, let's say, the second paper a little bit earlier than the July 11th due date, so we can actually submit that separately before we move on to the third one. That's correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You're welcome to turn it in before July 11th. And actually, if you want to get my feedback on it, it would obviously, you would have to turn it in before, because they both come out on July 11th. I won't be able to give you feedback on the alternative solutions paper to then help you think about your chosen solution paper. So if you want feedback on your 3 alternative solutions, yes, that would have to then come in before July 11th. I'll provide you feedback, and then that feedback may then be helpful for you in coming up with your chosen solution. But yes, you can always turn papers in before that deadline.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Emily, go ahead.
Hi, Professor. That was my chat box question, so I just wanted to confirm really quickly again. So 3 to 5 pages for each of the 3 papers.
Yes, the alternative solutions paper, it may take you a little bit more than 3 to 5. It depends upon what your solutions are and how complex they are and how many moving parts, if you will, there are to them. But yeah, for the most part, yeah, 3 to 5 pages, I think, is sufficient for all the papers.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And again, it's different than how I've done this course in the past, but I do think it's important when you're juggling 698 with this class. I can understand you've got a lot of time constraints. You're just not doing 698 and this class. You probably have a full-time job. You have family obligations, and so I thought by reducing some of the length of these assignments for this version of the class, I think would be very helpful for everyone. So yeah, 3 to 5 pages, I think certainly can get the job done. Then you also have your discussion posts, and this is another change that I made to try and make your workload a little bit easier. I talked to a couple of your colleagues who had asked about removing the requirement to respond to classmates, and at first I was a little hesitant to do that because I kind of like having the discussion board to kind of be that open forum for all of you to discuss and to share ideas. With the discussion board, I usually stay out of the discussion board. I read all of your posts, but I usually don't go in there and post as well because I really kind of want it to be exchange of ideas between all of you all. But after giving it some thought, after talking to your 698 instructor, I do know that responding to 2 classmates in addition to your initial discussion board post does add on more work for you. So I've made a change so that you only have to do 1 post each week in discussion board. So you do not have to respond to 2 of your classmates. So that's a change we made to try and help with your workload. So in discussion board, I've got, I'll place a post in there. If you've looked at the Canvas site, you've already seen those posts that I've put in there. And you will then respond to my prompt with a 2 or 3 paragraph response. And that's all you then have to do. You do not have to respond to any of your classmates. I hope you do have the time to be able to read through some of your classmates' postings and see how they approach the issue, maybe a little bit differently than how you approach the issue. But you'll only need to do 1 post for each one of those discussion board assignments. And again, parsimony is king here. So you can keep it as concise as possible. Again, 2 to 3 paragraphs is usually going to be sufficient in order to adequately address that prompt. Honestly, I probably shouldn't say this, but honestly, the discussion board grades tend to inflate the grades a little bit because if you go in there and you do a well thought out 2 to 3 paragraph, well written post, chances are that's going to be full credit on that weekly discussion board post. So typically people do very well on the discussion board posts. You can include outside research to support your essay if you would like, but you're not required to, again, and you're very welcome, Matthew, to try and help you with your workload a little bit this semester. I also reduced the number, and I think I told you this in email, I reduced the number of discussion boards from 7 down to 6 in recognition of our wacky schedule. Not only do you have 698 that you're juggling as well, but the way they scheduled this class is we began technically on May 30th, because last week was Memorial Day, we lost that Monday session. So we have tonight, we have the 12th, then we have the Juneteenth holiday on the 19th. So there's no class on the 19th. Then we will have a class again on the 26th. We're planning a class on the 3rd because it's not technically July 4th, but we'll talk about later on and we'll see what people's schedules are like. But right now we have a July 3rd and then July 10th scheduled. So we really only have 5 Zoom sessions together. So typically we have 7 or 8. So it's a wacky schedule to begin with. And that first discussion board, I pushed back to being due this week because we didn't have a class session last week. And I didn't really want you to have to do a discussion board without first going over the syllabus with you and telling you a bit about some of the requirements of those discussion board posts. So that's why our first discussion board post doesn't happen until this week. So went ahead and just reduced it from 7 posts down to 6. Again, they're parsimonious, 2 to 3 paragraphs. Just do make sure that you proofread them, make sure that they're well written, and address the prompt. And that will be good enough, I'm sure, to get you full credit on those discussion boards. And then we have our virtual participation in our sessions here on Monday nights. Since we are meeting from 6 to 8, it's only a 2-hour session, so it shouldn't take up too much of your time and take you away from your 698 projects too much. But what we'll do, as I said, we'll split up the session first half, and then we'll take a break, and then second half of the session. I think we should have no problem getting through all of our information, even though we only have 5 sessions. And the reason for that is in previous terms, when I've had 7 or 8 sessions, I've done breakout groups in the last part of the class session. This time we may not be able to do a lot of breakout groups just to make sure we can get through all of our information, but we'll kind of play it by ear and see how we're doing each Monday night. So again, we have session tonight, we have session next week on the 12th, none on Juneteenth, so that's a day off for you, a holiday, and then we have June 26th, July 3rd, and July 10th on our official schedule. So only 5 Zoom sessions. My computer is not being cooperative. There we go. Letter grades, you know how the program does letter grades. And one thing I really do, there are a lot of things I like about teaching in this program. One of the things I really like, pluses and minuses. I don't know if you like pluses or minuses. We don't have pluses and minuses at Long Beach. We've tried 3 times in my 22 years there to try and adopt a plus or minus system, and every time it gets shot down. Faculty vote for it, about 90% of faculty vote for it, and 80 to 90% of students vote against it. There are more students than faculty, and so it goes down to defeat every time we try and implement it. I do like it, especially in a graduate setting, because there's so much grade compression at the graduate level, because you're basically working in the A and the B level, the graduate level courses. And so, it's kind of nice to be able to differentiate between someone who gets a 98 and someone who gets a 90. And that's something we can't do at Long Beach. We don't have pluses or minuses. So I kind of like the plus or minus system, but you become familiar with it in your time in the program. So I won't waste too much time on it. Let's talk about our course schedule. I placed in here some of the due dates for your discussion board posts. And again, I've changed them up a bit so that I moved the discussion number 5. I've moved that due date back to July 11th, again, in recognition of you having that first draft due on July 7th in 698. So, and I've also changed it. I used to have the initial post due by Friday. I've pushed that back to having that due on Sunday. The reason I used to have it due on Friday is that it would then give the weekend for people to then be able to respond to the posts of others. But since we have dropped those response postings as a requirement for this class, there's really no reason to have Friday as the due date for your posts. So I pushed that due date back to Sunday. And so you'll see that reflected hopefully in all the dates, unless I got the dates wrong, which I may have, but in fact I did. But I pushed them back to Sunday. So discussion board number 1 will actually then be due on June 11th. And then number 2 will be due on June 18th. Look at me doing this in my head. Then June 25th. I think that's right.
Yeah,
And
you're
then,
right.
okay. I'm not good with dates here. So the thing we got then, what, July 2nd, and then the last two then due on July 11th. So we're going to push those back to being due on Sunday. Okay. Again, lots of different iterations of the syllabus, but they're all hopefully going to benefit you in the long run. Okay, let's talk about what we're going to discuss and when we're going to discuss it. Obviously, last week was our official first week of class, but since we didn't have a Zoom session, we didn't really cover this information. We're going to cover this information tonight. Chapters 1 and 2 in Randy. If you haven't read those chapters yet, no worries. You can look those over after class tonight, so it's not a big deal. But tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the issue of effectiveness. We're going to talk about what effectiveness is. We're going to talk about some of the reforms that we've seen, especially at the national level, to try and make the national government more effective. Then we're going to talk about some differences between public and private sector organizations that have a bearing upon the effectiveness, not only achieving effectiveness, but also how we can measure effectiveness. So that's what we're going to do tonight in the second half of class, chapter 3 in Rainy. And then, as I said, in the e-reserve readings, if you click on that link under e-reserves in our Canvas site, you'll see this Graham Allison article, Public and Private Management. Are they fundamentally alike in all unimportant aspects? You may have read that article in a previous course in the program. If you didn't, I will talk about that article in the second half of class tonight. And I think it's a really nice guide for us in understanding how effectiveness differs between public and private sector organizations. And I know that you have talked about differences between public and private organizations probably ad nauseum during your time in the program. We're going to do it here tonight with an eye on what it means for achieving effectiveness. I've listed your background paper that is due on June 18th by midnight. Your first discussion forum that you'll be responding to is you will develop a brief essay. I've reduced that to 2 to 3 paragraphs, and so it's 2 to 3 instead of 3 to 5, in which you explore the issue of effectiveness in public management. What does effectiveness mean and how do we measure it? Provide one example of an agency that's considered to be effective and why it's considered effective, one that is considered ineffective and why it's considered to be ineffective. It could be helpful for you to use outside resources, but again, I'm not going to require it. So if you don't need outside resources to do your essay, you do not have to use outside resources. I do ask that, again, we're looking about 2 to 3 paragraphs instead of 3 to 5. Make sure that you proofread it, make sure that it's well written and that addresses the problem. Now, again, you're just picking from your own experience and what you know about an organization you think is effective and an organization you think is ineffective, and why you consider one to be effective and the other to be ineffective. Then next week on June 12th, we're going to get more into the environment of public management and what that means for effectiveness. We'll do the environmental analysis and politics topics 4 through 6 in the Rainy text. Then your discussion forum will be on effectiveness in public and private sectors. Consider your organization. If it's a public organization, identify 2 factors that distinguish your organization from a private sector organization. If it is a private organization, identify 2 factors that distinguish your organization from a public organization. I should say, if you're in a nonprofit organization, then compare your nonprofit organization to a private sector organization. So 2 factors that distinguish your organization from a private sector organization. How do these factors affect the way your organization would define effectiveness? Again, we're looking at about 2 to 3 paragraphs. That's going to be the standard for each one of our discussion board posts. Then the next week, what will technically be week 4, is Juneteenth, and so we will not have class on Juneteenth for the Juneteenth holiday. But you'll still see that we still have a discussion forum assignment. And this is one where you're just going to share with your colleagues the issue or the problem that you are focusing on for your background paper. So you'll already have this pretty much done. Just distill it into 2 or 3 paragraphs. Here's the problem. Here's what the problem is all about, just to share with your classmates. And again, no class then on Juneteenth. The alternative solutions paper, again, is not due until July 11th, but it still sits there in that week because that's where it was originally. Week number 5, June 26th, we're going to look at the models for defining effectiveness. We'll talk about 4 different models: goal attainment, systems resource, internal process model, and a participant satisfaction model, and just talk about how nuanced effectiveness can be, and that there are different ways in which we can measure effectiveness beyond just whether or not we have achieved our stated goals. Again, those suggested readings are optional, so you do not have to do those, but they are optional there for your own edification. Your alternative solutions paper has been pushed back to a due date of July 11th, so it's not due that week. Your discussion forum post mission statements and goals. Please post the mission statement for your organization or an organization you are familiar with. What are 2 primary goals of the organization? How does the issue or problem that you identified in your background paper inhibit the achievement of these organizational goals? How does diversity factor into these goals? Again, a 2 to 3 paragraph parsimonious essay. Then July 3rd, which again, I know is kind of awkward because it's the day before July 4th. And I know some people may have some travel plans if you have Monday and Tuesday off. So we'll kind of play this one by ear. If we have to do a recorded session, we will. But we have to cover information on that week, or else we're not going to get through all the information we have to cover. So for that week, it's motivational theories. We'll talk about different models of motivation, different ways in which we can measure motivation and the importance of motivation for organizational effectiveness. Your discussion forum posting for that week. For the issue of the problem you selected in your background paper, consider the most appropriate model for defining effectiveness. Which models does your organization use in defining effectiveness? And is there any other model that you would recommend? Kind of pulling information from that previous week. And on July 10th will be our last Zoom session together. It's going to go by really, really quickly. And there we're going to talk primarily about leadership. We're going to talk about different leadership strategies. We're going to talk about how leadership strategies have an impact upon effectiveness. You will then have your 6th and final discussion posting, in which you will share your chosen solution and why you chose that solution with your classmates. So again, this one is going to be essentially distilling your chosen solution paper into 2 or 3 paragraphs to share with your classmates. Oops, oh gosh, just jump down again. And then again, that chosen solution paper is due by July 11th, and we pushed back the due date for the alternative solutions paper back to July 11th as well. So that's what we're going to be covering, and that's when it's all going to be happening. Yes, Emily, I will upload the newest version of the syllabus as soon as class is over, because again, I was making these changes today. So I'll make sure to have this newest version posted by right after class. And in fact, let me go ahead and save it so I don't lose any of the changes I just made. You're very welcome. Yeah, usually this doesn't happen. Usually the syllabus is a syllabus and we don't make any changes to it, but just in giving it some thought and talking with your 698 instructor, it's probably best that we make these changes to make things work out a little bit better for you. Everything else is boilerplate information on the syllabus, so you can read through that on your own. Any questions about the revised syllabus? I guess we're on version 5 or 6 of the syllabus. Any questions? All good? Okay. Again, our primary goal in this class is to give you a platform by which you can take the information, not just from this class, but information you learned in the program, and then apply that information to practically resolve a problem in your workplace. And that's the ultimate goal of this class. And I know it may sound corny, but it happened a lot in the past where I've actually heard from people after they finish the class months later, and they'll say, I took the solution that I wrote for the chosen solution paper, and I've actually applied it in my organization. It's now become a policy in my organization. So it really does oftentimes have a practical impact upon organizations. And so it's something that I really hope will be useful for you, not just in terms of pulling all the information together, and being able to apply the information, but also hopefully useful to you and your organization to really solve a problem that has kind of been vexing the organization for a while. So hopefully that will serve those dual purposes for you. Okay. And I will make sure to get this version of the syllabus up on the website as soon as we're done tonight. Okay, any other questions about the course or the syllabus or any of that good stuff? If not, it looks like we are pushing up against 7 o'clock. So let me go ahead and give you about a 10-minute break. Again, I think since we're only doing a 2-hour session, 10-minute probably makes sense for a break. So let's go ahead and take a break, 10 minutes. We'll say, let's come back at we'll say, let's try and come back about 7:05, if that's okay. I'll cheat you out of a minute. If we can come back at 7:05, then we'll cover all the information we need to cover in terms of foundational information, hopefully get it all done, and then be able to have you out the door at 8 o'clock. So take a break, come on back, and we will do our foundational information.
Professor, before we go, is it okay if I ask I want to just make sure that I have the answer for this. So the first paper, let's say 3 to 5 pages, second and third paper individually, not connected. What is the page requirement, just to make sure we don't come short of it?
There really is no minimum page requirement, but I would say for each of them, 3 to 5 pages for each of them would be
Okay.
sufficient.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Sure. Yeah, I'm very much about quality over quantity. And so I'm much more interested in the quality of writing as opposed to any types of page limits. Okay, go ahead and take a break. I'll pause our recording and then we'll come back at 7:05 and get into our information. Okay, it's 7:05, so we're back. I'm sorry for a short break, but we really need to get through some of this foundational information tonight. And we'll see how far we can get. We may have to hold off on our public-private information until next week, but we'll see how long this takes us and still be committed to getting you out of here as normal at 8 o'clock. So effectiveness is obviously not a new issue in the public sector. It's something we've been struggling with for generations. Fortunately for us in this class, in studying effectiveness in public management, we have a very broad and a very mature literature that we can draw upon. And as you know, public administration is a very interdisciplinary type of field. And whenever I teach the foundations class, we always have a discussion about if public administration is an academic discipline or if it is just a subfield within another academic discipline. And one of the reasons why we even have that discussion is because of how interdisciplinary the field really is and how we really borrow liberally from a lot of other academic disciplines for the theories that we then modify and tweak to apply to our understanding of public organizations and the public sector. So as we study effectiveness in public management, we are also able to draw in an interdisciplinary way on a lot of those other fields as well. We know that there is a very mature field of study in the area of organization behavior and organization theory. We also know that there's very mature literature base in the fields of economics and political science as well. So we draw a lot of our theories from those different disciplines. We also draw our theories from private management and from colleges of business. And so we draw from a lot of different fields. One of the problems that we run into, though, is when we draw our theories from other fields, they sometimes do not have the appropriate focus. So, for example, when we are drawing information from the fields of economics and political science, they make important contributions to our understanding of effectiveness in public organizations, but they tend to oversimplify things like motivation and the importance of organizational structure for effectiveness in public organizations. So they tend to oversimplify some of the important elements in public administration. When we draw from the field of organization behavior and organization theory, Those are also useful theories for us as well. But the problem is they oftentimes emphasize what we call the generic tradition. And as you may have been exposed to before in the program, this idea of a generic tradition means that in the generic tradition, we tend to treat public and private management as similar in most important respects. So when you are using this generic tradition, you're saying, well, we can understand effectiveness in a public as well as a private organization in much the same way. We are oftentimes overlooking the importance of the external political environment. Next week, we'll spend a lot of our time talking about the importance of that external political environment for our understanding of effectiveness in the public sector. But clearly, when we are dealing in a political environment, a very dynamic political environment, the way we define effectiveness may look different than if we are not dealing in that political environment, such as over in the private sector. So over in the private sector, we may define effectiveness as accomplishing our goals. We may define being effective as producing more output with less inputs, more of an efficiency type of a focus, because there are not a lot of those political demands being placed upon us. In public organizations, effectiveness may go beyond effectiveness and efficiency. It may actually go to how politically responsive we are to elected officials. It may go to representative bureaucracy and a lot of these additional values that we have in public as compared to private organizations. So just by borrowing theories from other fields that are generic in nature, we oftentimes overlook the importance of politics in achieving effectiveness in the public sector. But effectiveness has long been the bane of the existence of governmental organizations. And we have tried for generations to reform bureaucracies to try and make them more effective. And elected officials, when they are candidates, typically run for office by running against government organizations and running against the ineffectiveness and the inefficiency of those bureaucratic organizations. And just by way of background, to give you some examples, Jimmy Carter, when Jimmy Carter ran for the presidency in 1976, he, even as a Democrat, ran against federal bureaucracy. He ran against the government being ineffective and being inefficient. And during his time in office is when we got the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978. And you've probably in previous courses talked about the Civil Service Reform Act. It completely transformed the public bureaucracy, the way in which we hire people, the way in which we fire people, the way in which we manage personnel, all completely reformed with the Civil Service Reform Act. Carter, with the Civil Service Reform Act, made it easier for us to discipline and fire federal employees, try to have some bonus pay, some merit pay based upon performance, and also made it easier for political appointees to transfer career civil servants. And it was all done for the purpose of trying to make government more efficient and more effective. When Reagan ran against Carter in the election of 1980, Reagan also ran against the federal bureaucracy and ran even more aggressively against the ineffectiveness and inefficiency of the federal bureaucracy. And some of the reforms that Reagan put in place when he was in the White House, again, fundamentally changed the federal bureaucracy. Had a lot of cuts in terms of funding cuts, cuts in authority, cuts in staffing levels, a major downsizing to the federal government. The Reagan approaches also attempted to increase presidential authority over agencies and to increase the authority of political appointees over career civil servants. There's a very famous example of the Reagan administration where when Reagan came into office, he wanted to do away with the Department of Education. And if you know anything about the history of the Department of Education, Department of Education in 1981 was a relatively young federal department. It had grown out in the Carter administration of what used to be known as Health, Education, and Welfare, or HEW. When the Carter administration, we broke up HEW and created a Department of Education and a Department of Health and Human Services. Reagan felt that there should not be a separate, standalone, independent Department of Education at the federal level. So he appointed a Secretary of Education who he thought would go in and disassemble the Department of Education, and essentially would tear it down from inside. What ended up happening is the person that he appointed as Secretary of Education, once he got into the department, actually kind of bought into the Department of Education, bought into a lot of the programs and the initiatives in the Department of Education, and actually ended up trying to grow the department as opposed to taking it apart like Reagan wanted him to do. But Reagan really wanted to downsize the federal government to make it leaner, to make it more efficient, and to make it more effective. But there were associated problems. Whenever you increase the power of political appointees and erode the power of career civil servants, whenever you do that, you end up with things such as indictments. And we had an increase in indictments after some of the Reagan reforms in the 1980s. We had employee morale problems. Imagine being a career civil servant and being told that you're not doing a good job, and so we're going to take your authority away from you, and we're going to give your authority to this political appointing. By cutting back in terms of funding, in terms of staffing levels in organizations, that then gave those organizations a ready-made excuse that if they did not succeed in accomplishing their goals, they were not effective at accomplishing their goals, they could always say, well, the reason was this cutback. The reason was we got a budget reduction, we had to lay off all these employees. That's why we were not able to be effective as an organization. And once again, like in the Carter administration, the Reagan administration, we again try to link pay and performance. The problem with linking pay and performance at the federal level was always the commitment on the part of Congress to fund performance-based pay. They made these promises where they would tell members of the senior executive service, if you give up your career civil service protections, you become part of the senior executive service, you'll then qualify for bonus pay. And so all these people said, yes, we'll join the senior executive service. We're going to get this bonus pay. Then they worked very hard. Their organizations were successful, and Congress came along and said, oh, sorry, we don't have the funding to give you that bonus pay. We will find out later on when we talk about things like expectancy theory, we'll find out that one of the worst things that you can do for motivation is to promise a valued incentive to an employee and then not carry through on that promise. The ability of a leader to carry through on their promises is what's known as instrumentality. Instrumentality is the ability or the willingness to carry through on the promises that you make. The less instrumentality there is, the less motivational levels you have for your employees. But again, all these Reagan reforms were meant to try and make the federal government more efficient and more effective. So for the Carter administration and the Reagan administration, the problem of effectiveness was a systemic, was a problem with the people, with the bureaucrats. That the bureaucrats, these civil servants, were lazy, they were not doing their jobs, they were the ones being inefficient and ineffective. So it really was a war on people, a war on the bureaucrats themselves. In the Clinton-Gore administration and the reinvention of government, which I'm sure you've talked about before in this program, with the reinvention of government, the focus really changed from the people being the problem to the system being the problem. And even though the reinvention of government tried to streamline government by cutting back on over 320,000 federal positions, 325,000 federal positions, the goal of the reforms in the Clinton-Gore administration were to more focus on the consequences of the actions of bureaucrats and bureaucratic organizations. It wasn't so much on what the people were doing, it was rather, what are the consequences to our consumers and to our citizens? Now, admittedly, this cutback of 325,000 employees, many of those employees were in the defense sector. So they came from the armed services, they came from the Department of Defense. And so that 325,000 number is somewhat inflated. It wasn't 325,000 bureaucrats working in Washington, D.C. But it really fundamentally changed the philosophy that it's not the people, it's not the bureaucrats who are the problem, it's the system. And we need to focus on the quality of the products and services that we are creating, as opposed to focusing on the individual employees themselves as being a problem. Now, when the Bush administration started, George W. Bush administration came in, the Bush administration rejected a lot of the theories of the reinvention of government. They again shifted away from, well, it's a system problem, and shifted back to it's a people problem. And it's a problem with bureaucrats not doing their jobs and bureaucrats being inefficient and ineffective. And so in the Bush administration, he created what he called the President's Management Agenda, and required that federal agencies and departments completed these performance activity reports, whereby they would have to report on the amount of progress that they made toward the achievement of organizational goals. And in fiscal year 2003, the Bush administration then added some bite, they added some teeth to this presidential scorecard. And what they then required is that agencies, when they reported on the achievement of their goals, they created this red light, yellow light, green light indicator system. So it's kind of like, when a lot of us were in preschool, we had red, yellow, and green lights. And, the teacher would say red light, and everyone had to stop. Green light, you could then get up and play. Well, it's kind of like red, yellow, green light type of approach here as well. Organizations that were meeting their goals or making substantial progress toward their goals were given a green indicator from the Office of Management and Budget. That green indicator meant that they were being effective, and they were being effective enough so that they qualified for a budget enhancement in the next fiscal year. And that was a budget enhancement of usually about 2 to 3%. If you were making progress, not substantial enough progress to be a green light, but you were making some progress, you would be a yellow light indicator. Organizations that got a yellow light indicator were not promised that 2 to 3% increase like the green light organizations, but they were eligible for it. Given other factors, they may or they may not get it. If you were not making adequate progress towards your goals and therefore considered ineffective by the Office of Management and Budget, you were given a red light indicator. Agencies with a red light indicator were not eligible for that 2 to 3% budget enhancement in the next fiscal year. So this was a Bush administration adding teeth to its measurement of effectiveness. Only effective organizations, as demonstrated by their performance activity reports, would then be eligible for enhanced appropriations in the next fiscal year. So really added that punitive measure, if you will, to effectiveness. Then in the Obama administration, we kind of turn it around again, where we go back to more of the focus in the Clinton-Gore administration, where we again say it's the system and not the bureaucrat. We start to say, well, we recognize that governments have the potential to be effective. They have the potential to perform well, but it's not a science. There's no science you can apply to every organization. We need to understand the political context of public management and then work very hard to make, as President Obama referred to it, make public service cool again. He wanted to make public service appealing so that you're not vilified being a bureaucrat, but you can be praised as being a bureaucrat. And it's not the person, it's the system that is the problem. So it's a much, I don't know if you want to say warmer and fuzzier, but it was a more employee friendly, if you will, say, approach in the Obama administration than what we saw in the Bush administration. Then we move into the Trump administration. The Trump administration then reversed just about everything that the Obama administration attempted to do. And so in the Trump administration, we are shifting back to the focus like what we saw in the Reagan administration, where once again, it's the employees who are the problem. It's the bureaucrats who are the problem. We have a lot of discussion of the deep state and how we need to break up the deep state and get rid of these bureaucrats who are all doing the work of the deep state. Again, a very negative view of our chances of being effective at the public level. Then the Biden administration comes in and completely reverses what the Trump administration did, and then returns us to kind of the pattern that we saw in the Obama administration. This is this kind of ping pong effect that we see frequently with our public policies. A new elected official comes in, a new political party comes into power, and they completely reverse everything that their predecessors did. That's problematic. In foreign policy, that's problematic in terms of earning and maintaining the trust of our allies overseas. In domestic policy, it's also problematic in that when you're talking about effectiveness in public organizations, it's difficult for career civil servants to know what this administration is going to do and how this administration is going to view them. In one administration, you're viewed as you're not the problem. We're going to give you the resources and the support to help you be more effective. Then the next administration, well, no, you are the problem. You are a lazy bureaucrat, and we need to downsize and get rid of you and turn all these functions over to the private sector. Then the next administration comes in and no, you're not the problem. And you can see how it goes in that type of back and forth ping pong type of situation. So it does make it difficult for public administrators to figure out how to be effective and to gain the support of political elites in terms of making their organizations as effective as possible. So when we are looking at effectiveness, what are we looking at? Well, primarily when we are looking at effectiveness, we are looking within public organizations because our programs and our policies tend to be implemented within those public organizations. So by necessity, we do tend to have an organizational focus. When we're defining effectiveness within an organization, we can look at the goals of the organization because an organization is a group of people working together to pursue a goal. So when we talk effectiveness, sometimes we're talking about the ability of the organization and people within the organization to accomplish a stated goal. Sometimes when we're talking about effectiveness, we're talking about how effectively the organization interfaces with and interacts with its surrounding environment. How well does the organization obtain resources from its environment? That can also be an indicator of what we consider to be effectiveness in the public sector. In order to survive, all agencies need to have an environment that is capable of supporting those organizations, which means that environment must be able to provide the resources that organization needs. It must be able to provide a stable, adequate labor pool that is skilled and trained in doing the jobs needed to be done in the organization. It needs to be able to provide resources, money, and appropriations to support the organization. It needs to be able to provide political support in order to keep that organization going. So effectiveness could be how well the organization leverages its environment to get those resources to help it accomplish its goals. So sometimes how it interacts with its environment is an indicator of effectiveness. And next week, we'll talk about that as an indicator of effectiveness. We know that organizations take these resources that they get from their external environment and they transform these resources through those tasks that they do on a daily basis. And they do their tasks through applying technologies to, again, hopefully achieve the goals that they are trying to achieve. So sometimes we can look at effectiveness in terms of how well an organization is doing its daily tasks. Sometimes we look at effectiveness as how well an organization implements the appropriate technologies in order to accomplish those goals and to accomplish those tasks. Sometimes we look at effectiveness in terms of performance and have performance levels and productivity levels increase over the past year or 2 years or 3 years as indicators of increasing effectiveness. We also know that these organizations deal with uncertainties of processes by organizing activities and establishing structures and processes. What this means is effectiveness may also be defined as how effectively we have organized the structure of our institution. So how effectively organized are they? Do they have a flow of communication vertically and horizontally? Sometimes having this span of control, this unity of command, and some of these classical bureaucratic principles will make our organizations more quote unquote effective. So the structures could be very important. Processes can also be an important indicator of organizational effectiveness as well, taking us back to the classical school of organization theory and people like Frederick Taylor. who look for that one best way to do a job. And so maybe if we can work on our processes, we can make our processes more effective and more efficient, which will then make the outcomes, the products, and the consequences of those products more effective and more efficient as well. But we know that doing this organizing within our organizations involves leadership and involves strategy. So we talk a lot about effective leadership. How effective are our leaders at putting forth the strategy of the organization, the mission of the organization, and then getting employees to buy in to the mission of the organization? You know from your knowledge of organization theory literature that this speaks primarily to human relations and human resource management theory. How effective are leaders at providing the right set of incentives to get the contributions from their employees to then accomplish the goals of the organization? How good are our leaders at establishing strategies, doable, accomplishable strategies within our organizations? So essentially what we're talking about is effectiveness in public organizations is a multifaceted term. When we think about effectiveness, we oftentimes think about achievement of goals, but there are other ways in which we can define effectiveness as well. So my question to you is, when you think about your organization, what does effectiveness mean for your organization? How do you know when your organization is being effective? And I'll open it up to you. Tell me, how do you know when your organization's being effective? How do you measure effectiveness in your organization?
The number of projects that we return.
Okay, so I heard by the number of projects.
Yeah, so I work in public works, so we do capital improvement, mapping, permits. So a lot of our metrics involve, how many projects that we complete in our fiscal year.
Sure, I can absolutely see that. If you're working in public works, number of projects you're able to complete is an indicator of effectiveness. Probably the number that you're able to bring in terms of their coming in on time and coming in under budget, probably indicators of effectiveness as well. Anna says in text chat, customer complaints, that's a good indicator of effectiveness. If people are satisfied, this is kind of what we call the participant satisfaction model of effectiveness. That if people are satisfied, our relevant stakeholders are satisfied with the goods that we are producing, then that's an indicator of effectiveness. Emily says employee surveys, another indicator of effectiveness. This is kind of the human relations approach to effectiveness, that if we have a satisfied, we have a dedicated and an incentivized, motivated employee base, then that is an indicator of effectiveness of organizations as well. Lorene says the number of something, number of inspections completed, the amount of money dished out. So yeah, the number, that's a very quantitative, empirical way of measuring effectiveness, and that's another indicator. Precious says revenue versus expenditures, having surplus instead of deficit. We always have to balance the revenues that are coming in with the outflow of expenditures. And so certainly if we are running a deficit, then we're probably not being either effective, and we're also not being efficient as well. We know at the federal level, we always run deficits. Since 1969, we have run a deficit at the federal level for every single fiscal year, with the exception of 1999 and 2000. So 2 years out of the past, do the math quickly, however many years that is, was that going on 50 odd years that we have run a deficit. And so obviously that's not considered to be an effective or an efficient way to run a government. And most state constitutions have a prohibition against running a deficit, but there, as you know, there are a lot of ways to get around that, where you can artificially inflate your revenue through short-term borrowing in order to give you the appearance of a surplus when really you do have a structural deficit that you are dealing with. Cheryl has a really good point on federal performance measures. There are performance measures that are built in for federal agencies and departments that we'll talk about those a little bit later on when we talk about the OPM study that I have assigned for a couple of weeks from now. But there are some quantitative federal performance measures. The problem with performance measures, obviously, in the public sector is that they're oftentimes not quite as quantitative as a lot of the performance measures that we have in the private sector. And they're more difficult to build out in the public sector as compared to the private sector. Anything else? Any other indicators of effectiveness in your organizations? These are very good. So, but anyone else? I think the importance of this discussion is that effectiveness is multidimensional. It is multifaceted. And we talk all the time about all these things we have done to try and make government more quote unquote effective, but we oftentimes don't sit down and talk about what do we mean by effectiveness? Because how we define effectiveness will have an impact upon how we measure effectiveness and obviously the strategies that we use in order to achieve effectiveness. So one of the things I would like for you to think about throughout this class is this question of how does your organization measure effectiveness? What is considered to be effective for your organization? My program at Long Beach, we just went through a NASPA reaccreditation, and you go through that every 7 years, and we just went through it this year and just submitted our response to the Commission on Peer Review and Accreditation, which does the accrediting for MPA programs on the part of NASPA. And in doing that, we had to come up with our indicators of what we consider to be effective public affairs education. So, effectiveness in public affairs education oftentimes revolves around the competencies that we provide our students with. And so when our students leave a program, what types of things should they be competent in? What competencies should they take with them? And with NASPA, there are 5 universal competencies. I'm going to get them wrong, but I was a commissioner for 3 years, but that was way back 15 years ago, so I forget them. But to lead and manage in the public interest is 1. To participate and contribute productively to the policymaking process, to analyze critically, think critically, solve problems, and make decisions, to articulate a public sector perspective, and to communicate and interact productively with a diverse workforce and citizenry. I know they made some changes to them recently, but those are the 5 universal competencies. To be effective as a NASPA accredited MPA program, you must demonstrate to NASPA that your students are graduating from the program with those 5 competencies. That's what NASPA considers to be an effective program, what they consider to be effectiveness in an MPA type of education. So even in our field, we have these definitions of effectiveness that we have to try and define, and then we have to try and adhere to. But again, it's important to note it's multifaceted. Later on in the course, we will talk about the 4 main models of effectiveness. We'll talk about the goal attainment model, the systems resource model, the participant satisfaction model, and the internal process model. And we'll talk about them as not necessarily being mutually exclusive, but being 4 inter or overlapping definitions of effectiveness that I hope you'll then be able to look at your organization and determine which of those models of effectiveness are most correct for your organizations. So that kind of gets us started with the discussion of effectiveness in public organizations. Since we only have until 8 o'clock, I'm a little loath to get into our discussion of public versus private sector effectiveness, because I think that's going to take us longer than about 20 minutes. So if it's okay with everyone, let's go ahead and end the session here tonight. Then next week, we will pick up with a discussion of public versus private sector effectiveness. We'll talk about the differences between the sectors and what that means for measuring effectiveness in those sectors. Then we'll talk about politics. We'll talk about the political environment and what the political environment means for measuring effectiveness. I think those topics fit together really nicely then for our discussion next Monday. Okay. So let's stop there for now. Are there any questions or any observations on this foundational information, or any questions or observations about the course or any changes that we have made to our course tonight? Everybody good? Hopefully everything is as clear as a muddy river, as my grandmother would say. Okay. All right, what I will do is I will get our new version of the syllabus up on our Canvas site in a few minutes now. And then the course session tonight obviously is being recorded. So as soon as that recording is ready to go, I will then get that posted as a link up onto our Canvas site as well. And you can review this information anytime you'd like throughout the week. Then we'll be back at it again next Monday, again, talking about public versus private differences and environmental analysis. Okay. All right, well, thank you very much. It's nice seeing everyone. I'll get to know you a lot more as we move through the course, but I wish everyone a really good week, and we'll talk again then next Monday. So thanks again. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Professor.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Take care.